everyone, and welcome to this exciting episode of Kelly's Quest. I am so fortunate today that I have Dr. Marisa Richmond with me, and she is secretly one of my heroes and my idols, so I'm incredibly fortunate today to be with her. Do you want me to call you doctor? You want me to call you Marisa?
Marissa's fine. I'm pretty informal.
When you first discovered that you had this ability to make a difference in the transgender community, what was that like?
Well, I always knew that I could organize. I had done a lot of that when I was in high school. And so as I finally started to come out of the closet, I was living in Washington, D.C., actually, at the time. And I joined a support group there called the Transgender Education Association. I also started going to the nightclubs. I don't know if you watched the TV show Pose, but that was my era. And so I said to myself, I'd like to start, I have things I can do, ways I can contribute. But then I moved back to Nashville. I was a native of Nashville, and we didn't have a support group. So I said, well, I think I've learned a little something from observing and being a part of TGEA. So I'm going to do what I can to kind of get a group off the ground in Nashville. And I met a couple other people, and we got the group going. And then it just seems other people started to notice me, and I started getting pulled into to national groups.
Here's the thing that just really overwhelms me with what you're accomplishing is the fact that this was in the early 90s when you were doing all this. When I came out, I'm from East Tennessee also, and so by the time I finally became my authentic self in 95, I started hearing about these other people that were out doing work to make my life better that I had never met. And your name came up with an organization called T-Vals. And yeah. I saw this organization, I saw what you were doing, and you were like this mythical creature to me that was out doing good in the world while I was hiding as my authentic self and terrified to even leave my front door. And I heard about you going and beating on the doors of legislators, going and organizing T-Val, going and organizing all of these different things. And it gave me hope. And that's the impact of you, what you're doing. You'll never know the impact that you've completely had on people. And I can tell you firsthand that the work that you did in East Tennessee had an impact on my life that made it more possible for me to escape the transphobia that was within my community and that I held within myself. So thank you for being this mythical human being that was out there fighting for me when I wasn't brave enough to do it.
Well, I certainly wasn't mythical to myself. But yeah, we started the Tennessee Vals, the full name. We started actually in December of 1992. We were only trying to serve the Nashville metropolitan area, Middle Tennessee. Although we were one of the first groups to actually get a website. And we had a person at the time, Jenny Lee Love, who had just graduated from Tennessee Tech. I remember we were having a board meeting at her place, and she goes, "Oh, I want to show y'all something. I've created a website for us." We're like, "Oh, that's great. That's awesome. What's a website?" Because it was still so brand new, and most of us had no idea what it was. And I remember we all stood around her computer and going, "Wow, you can really do that?" And we were just flabbergasted, and that sort of helped get the word out. I didn't actually start doing a lot of the legislative work until the early 2000s, after we crossed over past the Y2K bug. We survived that experience. And so that's really when a lot of the political work began, although I had started trying to figure out what I needed to do, and others were doing that in the late 90s. My dad was actually dying of cancer at the time, so I kind of actually, for a while, I actually pulled back because I was trying to literally deal with family matters, and my mom died in 97, and so I was in full-time responsibility taking care of my dad. And so sometimes people weren't aware of that at the time. But when he finally did pass away in March of 2000, once I got through all the paperwork and the personal grieving and all that sort of stuff, that's when I really started to hit the ground, came back, hit the ground running. And and especially as we were, as a national community, we're starting to battle on things like the federal hate crimes bill and the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And of course, we weren't in those bills at the time. And more people from Tennessee were complaining about the birth certificate law. And I'm happy to talk more detail about that if you're interested. And so I said, we need to get organized in Tennessee, and I'm willing to take the lead to make that happen.
That was the thing that impressed me. I remember you all had a day on the Hill or something like that, where you all would try to get trans people to come to the Capitol building and go knock on the doors of the different representatives and state senators.
Yeah, the days on the Hill actually started a bit later. I don't remember the exact first year, but it was around 2004 or somewhere in there that we started doing those. Um, we had actually started the Tennessee Transgender Political Coalition in 2003. And then the Tennessee Equality Project came along, I think, about a year later. And so together we were sort of organizing these days on the Hill to encourage people across Tennessee. And of course, TTPAC, we actually had our own bills that we were trying to introduce related to the state of Tennessee. We were pushing for non-discrimination legislation, again, lifting the ban on gender changes on birth certificates. We wanted to add trans people to the state's hate crime law, which did have sexual orientation but did not mention gender identity, although the language has since been interpreted by the Tennessee Attorney General to be inclusive of trans people. So we've kind of just said, okay, fine, we accept, as long as you believe that to be the case, we're happy with that interpretation. And so, so we were pushing a legislative agenda and trying to advance the rights of trans people. And we said part of the way we're going to do that is for people in Tennessee to come together, carpool, come to Nashville. We'll pick a day. We'll all be here together. We would take group photos every year and put those out on social media so people would know, here are trans people in Tennessee. We've come together to the state capitol to speak up for us and for all those who either are unable to travel or unable to travel for one reason or another. And we were trying to increase our visibility and educate the legislators along the way about trans issues and trans lives.
And the birth certificate is fascinating. For people that don't know, in the state of Tennessee, when you were born and the doctor holds you up and they look at your genitalia, they put a letter on your birth certificate, and that's it. Whether they got it right or wrong, that is stuck on your birth certificate. And I know you've been working a long time to try to change that. And the mind-boggling thing for me is I was born a mile north of the Tennessee state line in Middlesboro, Kentucky. So because I was born a mile north of Tennessee and in the state of Kentucky, I was able to change my birth certificate. That 1 mile made a difference. And that should never happen, in my opinion. If you can explain kind of what it's like to try to get this bill advanced to where birth certificates can be changed in Tennessee and where we stand with that right now, that would be excellent.
Well, the bill was originally introduced by then former state senator Steve Cohen of Memphis. Cohen, of course, today is actually a member of Congress, so he moved up. So being trans supportive actually helped his political career. So anyway, we introduced the bill year after year after year in both the House and Senate. We had hearings on both sides, and we just could not get the bill through. So about 2 years ago, Lambda Legal officially filed a lawsuit in federal district court. The lawsuit is called Gore versus Lee. Gore is Kayla Gore out of Memphis, who runs an organization there called My Sister's House, which is building homes for homeless transgender people. And Lee, of course, is our governor, Bill Lee. And some of the deposition taking got delayed because of the pandemic. But it's my understanding they have been getting depositions of all the plaintiffs, and that we're hopeful of moving forward. The Tennessee lawsuit is based on the ones in both Idaho and Ohio. Those were the other two states with bans. Although ours was unique, ours is the only one that ever went through a state legislature. The Idaho and Ohio bans were policy bans within the executive branch. It would have been easier for us. We could have just gotten an executive order from a governor to flip that. But since ours was an actual law, we had to go about it differently. But Idaho and Ohio have had their bans now overturned, and so we're hopeful that the courts, since the language, even though the method is different, the language is pretty much the same in all three states. And since the courts have already ruled the other two states were unconstitutional, then we hope that they will agree and will finally lift the ban here in Tennessee. So we're quietly optimistic, but who knows what the courts are going to do.
It's an amazing adventure to think about it. Like the state of Tennessee, to me, is like I have a yearning to live there nearly every day. But at the same time, I have found the importance of states' rights. And states' rights in Massachusetts are far more accepting and tolerant and lenient and towards the transgender community than laws in Tennessee. And that's why I ended up having to move I wanted to be a school teacher, and down there I couldn't do it as my authentic self. And I come up here and lo and behold, I can do it. But if I had had that documentation, or not me personally, but just the documentation to change a birth certificate can change a world. I've seen so many people that have trans people that have changed their birth certificate, and there's like a switch has gone off on side of them, and they feel like they are validated just for that. So I wish you a lot of luck down in Tennessee trying to do that. And I know that you were talking about the Day on the Hill, where you all would bring people from all over the state to the state house to try to put a face to who we are, instead of us just being something that they've made up that they've never heard of or thought about. And so we're breaking down these misconceptions. And I have a feeling that that concept of Day on the Hill is being used everywhere in the country right now. Like I know New Hampshire right now is working to change their birth certificates and their driver's licenses and things such as that. And they're using a version of Day on the Hill where they're bringing trans people in to show who we are and why it's important to do that. So I think that's a brilliant concept of introducing us to us. And I don't know if you're the first one to ever do that with the TEP.
Maybe at the state level, yeah. Of course, going back in the 1990s, there was a national organization called It's Time America, which was founded by Jessica Xavier in Maryland, and they had state chapters. But we didn't have one in Tennessee, but there were state chapters in lots of different states. It's Time Kentucky, It's Time Georgia, It's Time Illinois, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's possible some of them might have done these legislative days. I'm not sure. But those chapters, we were never officially part of It's Time America. But that was the state chapters they created were sort of our model. Look at what they're doing. Look at this is what we need to be doing to move forward in Tennessee. And but in Tennessee, almost every organization, every part of the community has a Day on the Hill. There's NAACP Day on the Hill, Planned Parenthood Day on the Hill, and so on and so forth. The University of Tennessee Day on the Hill, et cetera. And so for the LGBT community to start doing that, and it was natural. It's like everybody else is doing it. Why not us? So we did.
And what kind of reception did you have at the beginning? Was it awkward? Were people accepting? Was it like they're gracious, but then as soon as you leave the office, you know that was a waste of time? Or
well, there were some I could tell were cold. Some were very friendly. Some were just curious. They had never met a trans person. They were trying to understand what this was about. I later heard that there were people asking behind my back, "Oh my God, where's she going to go to the bathroom?" And I'm like, "What? Like, that's not what this is about. But they were obsessing over that, but behind my back. Nobody said that to my face. But I found out later that that's what some people were saying. But I think people kind of got accustomed, especially because I was the registered lobbyist. So I was up there, well, not every single day, but 2 to 3 days a week, because they don't meet 5 days a week in Tennessee. Um, and so people kind of got used to seeing me. I was in the hallways, I was in the cafeteria, I was in committee meetings, and of course, going around. So even aside from the day on the Hill, I was up there day after day after day, again, making the rounds, talking to people, not only legislators, but staff members, other lobbyists, trying to figure out any way we could try to move forward. And then, in time, found ourselves spending more and more time figuring out how are we going to stop these bad bills. So they kind of got used to me after a while. Of course, every 2 years you get a bunch of freshmen, and maybe they had heard a rumor, and then they find out, oh, that's the one. Like, they'd always kind of look at me kind of like, especially in the committee hearings when someone would nudge them and like, that's the one, that sort of thing.
That's fascinating. So Jerry Cannon from New Hampshire was telling me that she would go into the Capitol and just sit down and talk to people and make her presence known every day. And it sounds so similar to what you had done. And that's what it takes, is for people to this change doesn't just happen because we want it to happen. We have to make sacrifices, unfortunately, and we have to sometimes become uncomfortable and make other people uncomfortable. In 2018 in Massachusetts, there was a ballot question where people got to vote on whether or not transgender people had access to public accommodations without discrimination, and it went to a statewide vote. And I remember talking with people from Freedom for All America, people from the Massachusetts Trans Political Coalition, and they kept saying how they have learned from TTPC that you created and how they were modeling a lot of the stuff that they were doing in 2018 here based on what you had been doing for this groundwork way back when. And it worked. We kept our rights. And it's the first time in US history where a state had a popular vote on whether or not trans people have rights. And we pulled it off. But TTPC kept getting compliments. And this was stuff you were doing back in the 2000s. And it's this groundswell of momentum that's been generated. And it was because you said that you knew how to organize, created the Tennessee Vows. Then next came the TTPC. And then didn't you go back to DC after that and start thinking of it at a national level at that point?
Well, actually, my first national position is back in '96. Like I said, we were getting the group organized here in Tennessee, and in those days, we started going to the Southern Comfort Conference in Atlanta, it's about 4-hour drive from Nashville. It's a hop, skip, and a jump from here. People from Nashville go to Atlanta all the time, and we are encouraging people from Tennessee to do so. And so one of the people in Atlanta was Dallas Denny, and she was the head of the American Education Gender Information Service, or AEGIS. And she happened to be from Middle Tennessee. She was originally from Smyrna. She lived here in Nashville for a while. Our paths may have even crossed. We were at least physically in the same locations on a few occasions. And so she said, I want you to be on my board. Next thing you know, I was the board chair of AEGIS. And that really was my first national position. And then after doing that for a while, I stepped aside, turned it over to some others. And then one of my fellow board members there was Allison Lang, who was the executive director of the International Foundation for Gender Education. And so working with Allison, she goes, oh, I want you on my board. So next thing I know, I was on the board of IFGE. Those were both more sort of educational groups, although there was a semi-political component. But the political work really started first when I was with the National Transgender Advocacy Coalition, and then later the National Center for Transgender Equality. Of course, NCTE actually has a physical office in Washington and a permanent presence, and that's something we never really had before NCTE. And so the years I served on the board, it was good because I kept going back to DC, and NCTE began to organize lobby days. Although those lobby days had started back in the 90s, thanks to people like Phyllis Fry. So trans people were going to Washington even before there was an NCTE. But NCTE, by being in DC and having that permanent presence, became sort of the central organizing organization and has really sort of picked up the torch. And I think the last lobby days, we had somewhere between 150 and 200 people from all over the country. There's a wonderful photo of all of us standing on the steps of the state capitol. And I pointed out recently, you notice we weren't burning down or storming the place. We were all posing and smiling. And then we went and had meetings, scheduled meetings with our congressmen and senators. And I've been part of that. And of course, as a board member, plus as an experienced advocate and lobbyist here in Tennessee, when we bring people together in Washington, they've asked me to get up and share and sort of help explain to people what they're going to be doing, since I do have a lot of experience and expertise in the political arena.
So how do you embrace being a political advocate, being a transgender woman, being a professor, and bringing all of these different intersectionalities together to do this work? Because I think a lot of people don't understand how they can do that. You're teaching people in your classrooms, I bet, right now, how to do this work as well. So do you want to talk about your job as a professor?
Well, specifically, my field is history, U.S. history, U.S. political history. And so I come from a place where I'm sort of informed by the social movements and the changes that have taken place. Of course, one of the things I've had to learn from teaching history and studying history is patience. As you were just quoting, the arc of justice, or the arc of history bends towards justice. But I've always sort of added a caveat to that, but it only happens when people make it happen. And that's one thing I've learned from history. I've had to deal with people who said, "Oh, we'll get this done in 6 months," and I'm like, "No, this isn't a sprint. This is a relay of marathons. This is not going to be an easy fight, and some of us aren't going to be there at the end. It's going to take us a long, long time." And I've had people who used to think it was a sprint who've come back to me and go, "Oh my God, you were right. This isn't simple. It isn't easy." But at least it's shown me the pathway to the future. And I, of course, many of us have a vision of what we want it to be. My study of the past, it's helped me understand how to get to the future, because I've looked at the civil rights movement, I've looked at the women's rights movement, I've looked at the Latino movement and Native American movements, and understood the challenges that each and every one of them faced. And while our challenges are unique to our specific community, there are a lot of parallels, and there are a lot of important lessons we can learn from those movements. And as a Black woman, that's part of my history and part of my tradition too. And so, I view myself and my generation in the trans community as part of the legacy of the civil rights movement. And I look at what they did and I say, there are important lessons we can learn. There are things we can do. Even if and there are, again, connections in these movements, and I benefited from their work, and I grew up, and my parents made sure I learned about these people, and I even had an opportunity to meet a few of them over the years. Many of them lived in Nashville at one time. C2 Vivian, who just passed away about a year ago, was one such person. And so I've had an opportunity to actually meet and socialize with these people and to learn from them. And I'm applying those lessons to this movement. And I certainly appreciated that what you were saying, that folks in Massachusetts, were looking up to what we did in Tennessee. because we were certainly looking at that ballot measure that you all were dealing with, and we were worried for you, but we were thrilled when the vote came in and we saw that you won so handily. And 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 I see each of these gains, regardless of whether they come from, whether through the courts or the ballot box. Of course, more and more people winning and running for office and getting elected. Appointments, like we're waiting for the confirmation of Dr. Rachel Levine, but that looks like it's going to go through. Each and every gain is something that benefits each and every one of us, and gets us a little closer. Racism isn't over. Sexism isn't over. Transphobia is not going to be over when we do pass the Equality Act. But at least it'll give us an important tool to fight transphobia.
It definitely will. And I think that what you said is really, for me, I was one of those people that I originally thought there would be no chance for change. I believed what my family was telling me, that I was going to be alone and unhappy and never have a job and no friends and I was going to go to hell. I believed all of that stuff, even after I transitioned at first, because all I could see was me losing jobs again and again and again as an educator. And I didn't even think there was a race to run, So then I hear about things that are happening and I'm like, wait, there is a race going on.
I actually have the pleasure of teaching a trans studies class every 2 years. It'll actually be up this fall. And whether the students are trans or gender non-binary or cisgender, it's a wonderful opportunity to talk about these issues and to educate them. And even in my other classes, for instance, just the other day, I made a reference to Lord Cornbury. He was a colonial governor of New York back in the early 1700s. He was accused of being a crossdresser. Today, it's not clear if he was or not, but I point out that this was a political attack designed to denigrate him, and it's a form of transphobia. So I use that specific word in class, and in trying to raise their consciousness or raise their awareness of hatred of trans people and how trans people have been attacked for many hundreds of years. And so it's part of that education process.
It is, and they're going to, I see my students, I see these trans youth and their mama bears and their papa bears. When we were doing when we were in 2018 fighting for the ballot question to keep our rights here, there was a lot of parents of trans youth that were out there fighting. There was a lot of trans youth that were out there fighting and knocking on doors and doing commercials and doing interviews. And to see parents on board now is the next step in that process.
We actually have a state senator here. She took me aside before the pandemic. We were at a holiday party. She pulled me aside and said, I can't remember if it was a niece or nephew, was transgender. And, I want to thank you first for being out there, for fighting for them, for being a role model. And I said, well, if you need anything, you let me know. And particularly since we've got actually 3 versions of the bills this year: bathrooms, sports, and healthcare. And she's now calling me on my cell phone. It's like, this bill's coming up. What can you tell me? And how do I fight this? And so, to have somebody who recognizes that they have a person they love and care about in their own family. So this isn't just some sort of amorphous philosophical idea. This is something that affects the state senator's own family directly, someone they love and care about. And the more we are able to come out, even though not every family is supportive, and I totally understand that, but there are growing numbers of parents, of grandparents, of aunts and uncles who are supportive, of siblings, and some of them are in important positions, and we need their voices, and they're very powerful. And when that family member happens to be a state senator, granted, the bill passed in the state Senate the other day, the sports bill, but this senator was one of 6 who voted no, and I'm thrilled that she did so. And we need to get more people coming out and engaging family members, because they're a very powerful tool, a very powerful ally.
They really are. And just to talk about the sports, the sports bill real quick. I'm an athlete, a trans woman, an athlete. So this really resonates with me. And what's happening all over the nation right now, there's a plethora of states that are pushing anti-trans legislation saying that trans girls cannot compete in the sport that matches their gender identity. I thought that last year the Supreme Court said that that's not legal in a way, and then the states are still trying to pass this, and that's like, this
Yeah, the Supreme Court ruling was specific to the workplace, not to schools. So it was a very narrow ruling. It was based on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Schools are covered by Title IX of the Equal Opportunity in Education Act of 1972. Now, on his very first day in office, President Biden issued a new executive order and following up on that Title VII ruling, but he mentioned in that executive order, Title IX, he pointed out that there are several other, because the Title VII ruling was based on the fact that there's the phrase or term sex discrimination. It's banned. And that's what the Supreme Court, and before that, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission ruled upon. So what the president said in his executive order, this same language appears in Title IX, in the Fair Housing Act of 1964, and in one of the Immigration Reform Acts. He said, so I believe that we have banned discrimination against LGBT people in these three areas of the law as well. So since he issued that executive order, HUD has followed up and said, based on the president's January 20th executive order, we're banning discrimination in housing and from federal funding and federal housing. We're waiting for the similar statement in Title IX, but that's what we're dealing with, again, coming out of all of these state bills. Mississippi's actually has gone through the legislature. It's sitting on the governor's desk. He is planning to sign that. So that's the one that's furthest along. Tennessee, like I said, our sports bill passed the state Senate. They haven't scheduled a vote on the floor of the House, but it is headed to the floor of the House, and we expect it to pass there. I don't know if you've noticed, but of course we're taping this on a Saturday, and this morning, as part of the amendment package on the COVID relief bill, one of the amendments was a trans sports bill introduced by Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, the former football coach at Alabama, or excuse me, at Auburn. If you're in the Southeastern Conference, you don't make that mistake. But anyway, Senator Tuberville introduced an amendment. Thankfully, it was defeated 50 to 49. So we defeated it by one vote. And so the Senate the U.S. Senate just debated on this morning. And there's a wonderful quote from U.S. Senator Patty Murray of Washington. She's the chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And she said, y'all need to get a heart. And by the way, Senator Murray chaired the hearing for Dr. Levine a couple weeks ago, or whenever that was. So so we have her in that position. Again, she's standing up and fighting for us. She's working with us, the folks in Washington State, have developed a good working relationship with Senator Murray, and it's part of the way we've advanced. Because there was a time that amendment would have sailed through. I mean, let's be honest, they would have banned it. They would have passed it in the Senate. The House probably would have just gone along. But instead, the House has passed the Equality Act, and the Senate defeated this awful amendment this morning. And I think does set the stage both for the adoption of the Equality Act and for the confirmation of Dr. Levine.
That's huge. And Dr. Levine, can you kind of let people know who she is and what the significance of what's happening with Dr. Levine?
Dr. Rachel Levine is from Philadelphia. She is the current Secretary of Health for the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. She got very high marks for her handling of the COVID epidemic. Her field is pediatrics. She's an award-winning medical doctor, a physician, belongs to a number of professional organizations. And so President Biden nominated her to be the Assistant Secretary of Health. That would make her the number 3 person within HHS. She would help oversee a number of national healthcare programs, not specific to the trans community, but for everybody. But certainly, she would bring her expertise and her knowledge to make sure that the programs, the funding is inclusive of trans people, and it can, as a pediatrician, she would be particularly and is particularly interested in taking care of children. So she would be the first openly trans person to be confirmed by the Senate. So there's a built-in time delay between the hearing and the vote. But Dr. Miguel Cardona was just confirmed as Secretary of HHS. He did speak out in his hearing. He supports trans students and trans athletes. And so we're expecting the Dr. Levine vote any day now. And that once she's confirmed, and it looks like she has the votes, the several Republicans on that committee voted yes, including Senator Murkowski, Senator Collins. So we expect them to vote yes on the floor. So that'll give us the votes we need to confirm. We won't have to go to a tiebreaker. And thus, she will then be in that office and will be able to do some, we believe, wonderful things for the healthcare of all Americans, but especially for transgender Americans.
It's the fact that we can even have someone that's openly trans even be considered for a cabinet position for the federal government is a yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this during the Obama years, and we were getting closer and closer, and we all knew that it was going to be inevitable. We weren't sure if we were ready to have somebody that, but clearly now in 2021, we're ready. We're ready, and most importantly, the Senate is ready.
So you were talking about, just a second ago, you mentioned President Obama, and he helped the community quite a bit through executive orders. Now, executive orders, as we've learned, can be undone by the next president, but Obama did a lot, and I almost felt like there was an evolution that took place within him in his tenure at all. I mean, in his tenure with it. And I was curious if you had any interactions with his administration that might have helped him to evolve a little bit in his understanding.
Well, for starters, I actually had an interaction with him. I was invited to the White House LGBT Pride reception in June of 2011. The 10th anniversary is coming up this June. I was just looking at my calendar. And so I actually had an opportunity to meet one-on-one with the president. And there were 13 of us taken aside. I found out later I was the very first trans person to get such an opportunity to shake his hand and to meet with him. But when it took the 13 of us into the room, the diplomatic reception room, I looked around and I said, oh, gee, I'm the only trans person here. I'm representing the whole country. And so I made a point of emphasizing the word transgender, that we appreciate what you've done, but the transgender community appreciates everything you've done. The transgender community needs you to do more. So that was part of it. We also had policy meetings at the White House, and I was part of the group that went to the White House in November of 2012. So that was just a few days after the re-election. It was actually on Transgender Day of Remembrance. But there were about 30 of us, and we had rehearsed before the meeting. We covered a couple dozen topics. I can't remember the exact number of topics. John Williams of the Victory Fund and I, we specifically focused on hirings and getting more trans people into the administration in different positions, and in particular, more diversity among the trans community, because I pointed out at that point all the appointees were white, and I said for those of us who are non-white, we need those. Our children need those role models too, and but we talked about healthcare, housing, incarceration, immigration, the military, employment, safe schools. Again, it was a pretty long list of topics, and the White House staff was around the room and all taking notes. And I noticed over the second 4 years, almost everything we covered that day, I started to check off just one after another. Those things we said we wanted done were being done. And I think by the end of the administration, NCTE estimated there were about 163 policies, either directly from the president or within the cabinet departments, that improve the lives of trans people around the country. Some were, again, like the military ban being lifted, were big. Others, like just allowing transgender pilots to keep their pilot's license and not have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to fly planes and keep their jobs as pilots. I mean, the number of people affected by that was very small, but for the trans people who do fly airplanes, it was a very, very big deal for them.
So you laid the groundwork in 2011 and you see it come to fruition throughout. You must sit back sometime and feel exhausted and humbled and honored all at the exact same time.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, how do you balance this drive to make change with not burning yourself out? Because I see a lot of advocates, they'll do it for 2 years and then they're like, I'm done. And I don't want that to happen to me. I want to be doing this when I'm 85.
Well, like I said, for one thing, I have that longer term perspective because I'm an historian. I've looked at the other movements and I've understood how long and hard those battles were. So yeah, I get tired. I get exhausted. I sometimes get depressed. I get, knots in my stomach, get nauseous. I've gone through all of that. I've cried, but I keep reminding myself this is a long-term battle. It's not going to be easy. I've known that for a long time, and it's just simply playing out. Some ways differently than I expected, but I never thought it was going to be easy. Of course, I try to find other outlets. Before the pandemic, I was playing trivia every Sunday. I've got 2 cats that were running around here a few minutes ago. I think they burned themselves out and went to sleep. And so, so at least I have some things to take my mind off of a lot of the political work. And I get together with friends just casually from time to time. A bunch of us, we go out to dinner. We meet at mostly an Italian restaurant, and pasta and jugs of wine, and and we just have just conversations. And although some of the conversations do revolve around politics, sometimes it's like a new movie came out, or a favorite television show, or somebody came through town on a concert, and we just we talk about just life and just the sort of things that bring a smile to everybody's face. We all have those interests, whatever they may be: sports, art, music, dance, theater, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I try to find those sort of outlets from time to time to sort of help renew myself. And everybody needs to do that. Everybody has to take that step back. Some need to step back a little further and a little longer than others. But again, I at least do try to pace myself.
The fact that people in our community hear about other people in our community and want to go help one another, I think says a lot about the trans community itself, in that people from California were coming here to help us fight in 2018 on the ballot question. People from Michigan were here. People were coming from all over the nation to help this fight here. And I think that that's what's happening. Sometimes I get to rest because I know you're out there for a second doing something, and someone else is out there doing something. So I can go play a round of disc golf and charge my batteries. And then tomorrow I'll go back and do my stuff again. Whereas at the beginning for you, did it ever feel like you might be the only one in the whole state of Tennessee that was fighting for trans rights in the state of Tennessee at the beginning? Or was there
I was sort of the leading organizer. And certainly there was a lot of emphasis on me, and I kept trying to lift others up, to say, no, it doesn't just have to be me. I've tried to get more people involved, engaged, on local boards and commissions, encouraging people to run for the school board and city councils, trying to say, I don't have to be the only one engaged in sort of public service that way. Where I've actually had to say no are board invitations. Um, and believe me, I want to say yes to every single one, and my inclination is to say yes, and then I have to step back and I ask myself, do I have the time? Can I make the time commitment? And I've actually had to turn down something like 10 board invitations, and I really regret saying no to them because I want to say yes. And I recognize each and every one of these organizations is doing fabulous work, and I would like to be able to contribute, but again, I didn't have the time, and just I had to regretfully turn them down, and so that's where I have had to say no.
And so when you're talking about boards, like, is PFLAG pretty big in the Nashville area, or like where would Trans Youth go to in the Nashville area for support?
Well, the funny thing is, well, first off, in answer to your first question, yes, we actually have several PFLAG chapters: Nashville, Franklin, Clarksville. They all have chapters, but specifically the Nashville chapter, they meet at a center that takes care of the children during the meetings, and so they formed, especially for the trans youth, because almost all of the parents now have trans children. There are only a handful of exceptions. So so the center where the group was meeting has started their own support for the kids called Trans Youth Meet to Empower, TYME or TIME. So these kids have a place once a month where they can go. And again, some of them they're coming in a couple of cases, a 2-hour drive to Nashville. But again, their parents are supportive. Of course, they have some wonderful conversations with their parents going back home at the end of the evening. But they're able to come together for about 2 or 3 hours once a month with peers and with experienced counselors, and a couple of them are even transgender counselors. And so they're able to sort of network and develop friendships. Of course, with the pandemic, all of the meetings are taking place on Zoom. And so I'm not exactly sure how the kids are interacting. Of course, it's a challenge, especially for the schools where the children, well, in some cases, some schools do have GSAs, and those kids have lost those GSAs because of the pandemic. On the other hand, there's more remote communication, but because especially if the parents are not supportive, not having a physical GSA in the school, even though they have the technical ability to connect online, doesn't mean that that parent isn't going to walk in and look over their shoulder and it's like, oh, no, you don't do this. At least in a GSA during the school day, they have that ability to meet and gain at least some peer support. So this whole pandemic has really created a dilemma for some of those kids, and certainly, even though I'm stuck at home myself, I'm working from home. I'm still trying to be as visible as I can because I understand those children and their families need to know that we're out there for them.
We're getting near the end of the interview, but I did want to go kind of backwards in time a little bit to when I transitioned, just for a second, in Tennessee. Back in 1995, I transitioned for one whole year, freaked out, and detransitioned. And then I transitioned again in 2005. But from 95 to 2005, a lot changed. A lot changed to make it even though we've changed more now and we're further ahead, a lot changed for me to feel safe in 2005. And I think part of it for me was representation in the media slowly started to change a little bit. Will and Grace was out, so there was somebody, they weren't trans, but at least there was somebody that might be gay on TV that was okay with it. And back in the 90s, who was your role model that you had when you, I don't know when you transitioned, I don't know your transition story.
Well, I mean, I mentioned Dallas Denny a few minutes ago. She is, was the executive director of Aegis, so she was doing some work. Back in the 70s when I was in college, I'm pretty old now, I first became aware of the Outreach Institute headed up by Ariadne Kane. And that was the first sort of hint I had of somebody doing work, organizing, and speaking on our behalf. And I actually finally met Ari at a conference in Long Beach in 1997. And I have a photo of the two of us together. And when I introduced myself, by this time I was the board chair of Aegis. And when I introduced myself at this conference, she had just spoken. And one of the things she had mentioned, ironically, like, it's always a pleasure when someone comes up to me and says, you were the first person I heard of, you were the first person I knew about. And then I walked up to her and said, you were the first person I heard of. I ended up like repeating those words almost precisely. And Joanne Roberts, who was with Renaissance, she was standing there between us and started roaring with laughter. And Joanne goes, well, there you go, like that. And so that was a special moment to actually meet somebody who had been out there at that point for 20 years and maybe longer. I don't know exactly when Ariadne started, but to meet somebody who had been doing that work at that point for 20 years and had been out front organizing and advocating and educating. And I never imagined I might even ever one day be at that level, but to see what she and to start learning about what others were doing was really important to me.
Well, you were a very good student because you have pretty well mastered it. I feel like your advocacy work is truly changing lives. Like, I can tell you personally, for me, that you were out there and I knew who you were. I'm sure back in 92 and 2005, you didn't know who Kelly Jenkins was. But I knew who you were. And that's how it happens. Like, I have students that reach out to me now from 2003, thanking me for being authentic, and it helped them. So you just never know who you're impacting. And that's the beautiful thing about life, in my opinion. You go out and you put kindness out in the world, you put goodness out in the world, you put love out in the world, and you say, but I'm going to go change your opinions about my community through that motion and that action. A lot has happened, and thank you for being a part of it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Dr. Marisa Richmond, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. And everybody, we will see you for the next episode. Bye.